I'm DJ.
And I'm Andrew.
Welcome to One Shot Staff,
a TTRPG podcast where we seek out new ways to tell your stories through different systems and games. Today we are joined by Crescent Chimera, also known as Camilla, a author of a exciting new game known as Astro Prisma. It's a solo RPG. It launched on Kickstarter. Camilla, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to learn more about your game and talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
We want to talk about you first, because who you are is important and inspires what you are writing. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Give the listeners an idea of who you are and where you're coming from.
I'm Camilla. I started being interested in doing any sort of art very early on. When I was like 12, 14 years old, I started doing music. And then from there, I kind of developed an interest in different mediums. First, it was video games, doing music for games, then going on to doing art for games and programming and everything. And then from there, I developed an interest in RPGs, almost starting from games that were inspired by RPGs like Disco Elysium, Baldur's Gate, Pillars of Eternity, etc. And then from there, I got really into RPGs, and that enabled me to use something that I was really interested on from the very beginning, which is graphic design, but I was never able to do really in video games. And also writing. And that kind of helped me sort of build a system where I could put all those ideas that I had throughout all of these years together into a single project, and that was Astro Prisma.
That's awesome. I think so. I've got a somewhat similar journey in the TTRPG space. I've been a graphic designer working in marketing and the boring side of the creative medium for a long time, but it has been fun to finally use those skills for good and lean into the creative side of what made me attracted to the medium in the first place. And I'm super excited to explore the different ways you've been able to pull on your skills, interests in mediums. Because I was watching in another video that you're doing the soundtrack for the game that you're putting out as well. I'm super excited to hear that. So you've got a touchstone in music, you've got experience in graphic design and layout. Also, I think I heard something about Blender. You did some stuff with Blender for the game.
That I learned almost by chance for this game very specifically. I wasn't really familiar with that. All of the video games I worked on, everything I worked on was pixel art based.
Yeah.
So 3D modeling was completely new to me. And just, I think by chance, I got recommended a video on YouTube, just a very a basic tutorial on how to do planets renders in Blender. And then just from there, I started doing spaceships and started doing all of the locations and things like that. And that developed, I think that also inspired Astro Prisma.
That's awesome.
I chose Astro Prisma as my first game because I had different ideas to start. And I chose Astro Prisma because I wanted to use all those things that I ended up doing in 3D modeling.
Yeah, I dove into, it was about I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, I dove into Blender. I was strangely enough, doing pixel art on a little indie game with a buddy of mine. And I was doing that, and then we were talking about what we were doing next. And I'm like, I really need to get around to learning Blender. It was the 5th time that I tried to pick it up. And I learned about hard surface modeling and that whole retro sci-fi stuff that people are doing in Blender. And I was like, this is incredible. I started doing a course, and then life happened. And then every time I go back to pick up Blender, it's like relearning. It's not like riding a bike. It is completely a relearn.
It's a muscle. It's like losing mass on a muscle when you're not
exactly
using Blender. So I also had a little foray into Blender when I started using Tailspire, the virtual tabletop, because that was the only way to get custom miniatures in there, and it was to take STLs and convert them and resize them. I was doing that daily for 3 months. I opened up Blender the other day and I was like, I don't remember how to do anything.
What do I do with this cube? Sacrifice it.
It's really cool. All of the skills that you've picked up very well in order to push yourself into the TTRPG publishing space. A little bit of background on how we found Astro Prisma.
Oh yeah,
We were fairly close to the end of our Kickstarters.
back in February.
And
Yeah.
back in February, I believe, when I stumbled across it on
Was it Reddit?
Reddit.
Yeah,
I
it was
believe.
Reddit.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Reddit. And I saw the artwork and I was like, ooh, the colors, like, it looks amazing. So I sent it to Andrew and I was like, I want to keep an eye on this project. This was, I believe,
You weren't just that. You're like, can you please make me a pretty render like this? It looks
you do this?
awesome. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is in Blender. I'm not gonna be able to pull this.
It was very visually striking.
Yeah.
And then like launch happened. And like I was keeping up with it and I was like, cool, I'll get the PDF. Right. And like I was reading about the project. I was like, this is interesting. I've never played a solo RPG. Andrew has. I'm just now getting into that space. And I was just like, man, this is really cool. This is really nice. Well made. And like I just kind of like dove deeper and dove deeper. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna upgrade to the physical. So I upgraded to the physical tier. And then you came out and said that you were going to include rules for 2 players. And that was when I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to the top tier there.
Yeah,
Because
which that throws me to a question we were talking about before that I want to see what it is from you. So first off, the first thing that compelled both of us was like, this looks gorgeous. This looks evocative. It fits a genre that we're interested in, that we like to play with, but it is done on an excellence level that you rarely see. So good on you. It's gorgeous. I freaking love it.
Thank you.
And I'm insanely jealous of your multifaceted talent in that way. But not to say that the only reason people backed your game is because it's pretty. But I do want to hear your like pitch for somebody that maybe has never seen the art for your game, that never is first attracted to it visually, which I think is any game that we market online is going to be primarily visual first. But just give me the pitch.
especially
For
the things
Astro
you're
Prisma.
excited about.
Yeah, exactly. Like the parts that you find most interesting and special, so much so that you found it important to carve out your own game in a very large niche.
So the reason why I made Astro Prisma is first because of my love of sci-fi RPGs. I love games like Mothership. I love games like Death in Space, even the original Traveler. I love those sort of games. But one thing that I just kept hitting every time I play those games is that they're sort of very location-based, very specific, like storyline-based, like you're in a spaceship or you're in a planet. But what compels me about science fiction is this idea of like exploration, of like the unknown, exploring different planets, almost like I don't know, something like No Man's Sky.
Yeah,
Like that sort of premise for a game where like you can go anywhere, you can explore. And I wanted to make a game like that. That was more about like you're in a spaceship and you can go anywhere. You can go through different planets, different systems, meet different factions. And the other part that I really wanted to do in this game was the faction element. Because out of the solo games that I've played, there's usually 2 types. There's the journaling games, which are very creative writing. It's a lot of work on your side as a player to just come up with everything. And on the other side, there's more, I want to say, board game based solo games that are just about rolling on tables and you just go through different elements. In the case of Astro Prisma, I wanted to make a game and a system for faction play that felt authentic and that was able to create a story that was not linear, where you can play one time with one faction and go through different story events or even the same event in a completely different way because you're siding with one side instead of the other. And just sort of recreate. A lot of it also comes from video games, like that feeling when you play any game that has factions, like again, those RPGs I was talking about, Skyrim, Fallout, where you can replay the game so many times with different characters, role playing. and sort of bring that element into solo RPGs, which I feel like usually they don't have that. It's less about role
Yeah.
playing, more about making choices or doing those sort of thing. See, those were the two biggest things that compelled me to do Astro Prisma.
That's awesome. I think so. I worked on, it's not out in the world. One day I'll probably spend time and put art on it, but I built a supplement for the Cypher system, which is a game that I've ran for friends for a while. DJ's been in it for about a year now. Our last sessions tonight, for the entire campaign. But in that campaign, I built out a faction system supplement because I was like, man, we've grown in influence as characters in this campaign over the course of the entire year. And then some. And like, I didn't have the support for that world level, levers and pulleys, to play with for the players. So I built that out and it was fun and I really enjoyed it. But also even on the other side of the fence, the other factions and how they react and would create problems for the players was new for me in the design space to kind of jump into. So when it comes to how you built out your different factions, do you want to talk a little bit on the nerdy lore side of like, what you explored when it came to like morality and like, I think you've got like some synthetics and stuff like that in your games.
Yeah, so for the faction system, I had this idea very clear early on that I didn't want to make factions where like it's obvious that these ones are the good guys, these ones are the bad guys. So I wanted to make factions where like the players are actually met with decisions or events in the story that they actually have to make a difficult choice in, and they had to make sacrifices and really have a hard time picking what faction to choose. And each faction I wanted to have its own bright side and its dark side, like everything I wanted to be sort of in a gray zone that allowed the player to just not have like an easy choice. Like as soon as you see the faction, I want this one.
Yeah.
I wanted the players to like know a little bit about them when you start the game, but as you find more about them, you get to experience different sides of them. Then you get to make your decision.
Yeah.
This sounds like everything that Starfield should have been when it came out, right? Because like Starfield like doesn't really lock you out of anything by following literally every quest line, and there's really no moral choices to make other than like be pirate, don't be pirate. Whereas you have given the players more freedom to really kind of build their narrative. Like, I want to do this faction and I want to be a bad guy, right? Like, that's great.
What's what's your relationship with Starfield, out of curiosity? Because there's other things that I see as like I don't know, like I think like FTL comes to mind when I see like the shipbuilding mechanic stuff. Like there's other influences for sure in the video game space, but because there's some overlap there with factions and open world and shipbuilding, that is an interesting parallel to draw.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a very big sort of correlation with Starfield because they're both games that try to do science fiction in a retro futuristic style, as opposed to like the cyberpunk style that is like more prevalent nowadays. My relationship with Starfield, I'm a huge fan of Fallout. That is like my favorite game from the video game space in this sort of style that I've talked about before. And I was sort of going into Starfield with like very low expectations because I know that's, the latest game that Bethesda made, they were not my favorite. New Vegas is my favorite and they didn't make it. So, but yeah, Starfield, it's mixed feelings because I am the sort of person that I probably spend like 20 hours or more on the ship building system, just on that alone. And that part of the game is amazing. I love that part of the game. But some of the other systems are, they were very underwhelming. The faction system in particular is the one that I really was disappointed by. Again, exactly what you said about like being able to just be everything, be the vanguard and be the space pirates at the same time. And it just has this feeling where like your choices don't really have an effect at any point because you can do anything, you can side with anyone. It doesn't really involve anyone. And
It's almost like you break the spectrum of you go from like a game on rails, and then you've got
yeah,
open world, right? And then like you go so open world that it's actually on rails still.
Yeah.
Because
yeah,
like even
totally.
down to what you have to do with Constellation in the game. If you're not familiar, listeners, with the game, like there's a faction right out the bat. You have to pursue the storyline with this faction, but everything else is just wide open, but you don't get locked out of anything either. So it doesn't feel like your choices end up mattering. Yes, you can make a lot of choices, but they don't impact a lot.
I feel like when I look at a game like Starfield, it just, from a game design point of view, it looks to me like the sort of game where like there's a series of like groups of like working groups in the company that were tasked with doing a specific system. And
Yeah.
they didn't really connect with each other. Like someone did the outpost and they don't really mesh with any of the other systems. Someone did the shipbuilding. It doesn't
Yeah.
really mesh with the rest. And that, I feel like when you make a game with so many people, with such a big team, AAA game like that, sometimes if you don't have the right direction, it's very hard to make everything work together. In that
It
Yeah.
sounds like you and I play video games very similarly, which is cool. I will spend most of my time in a few different areas of every RPG. Character creation, and if there's some sort of customizing agent, right? Fallout was the settlement building. And with Starfield, it was the shipbuilding. I spent so much time in that. But with back to the narrative side of it, something that I feel like could have been better, right, with Starfield is all they would have needed to do is have given a second option to pursue that main quest line that wasn't Constellation.
Yeah.
That's all it would take. And you've kind of got that built in by not pigeonholing anybody into a faction. Instead, it's like, hey, here's the options. What do you want to do? And I think that is a fantastic game design approach, whether it's going to be in video games or in the TTRPG space.
Could you give us like an example in the game of like maybe two factions that are diametrically opposed, not evil and good, and then how, you've played with that good and bad side to both factions and how that kind of functions, like not casting the morality aside, but seeing how they oppose each other and how you navigate that within Astro Prisma.
Yeah. So there's 5 factions, and the way I build them is that some of them are in certain aspects that they care about, they're opposed to another faction, but in a different aspect, they might be more inside or aligned with one of the other factions. So you can have a system where like you're very much aligned with one faction, you're sort of in the middle with like 2 factions, and you oppose another faction. So it's not just about picking one, but you can also make the choice of, I just want to be sort of in the middle with this one, or I actually want to oppose them more harshly. And that's also part of the decision process. And in terms of what they actually diverge in the factions, well, there's, I would say the most obvious sort of conflict is between there's this sort of Trade Federation sort of faction, which is the Intersolar Federation, the ISF. That is very often in conflict with Work, which is like this guerrilla fighter group. And those factions, they often clash for resources in planets, for trade routes that they're pillaging and things like that. And then there's other spectrum, which is the technology spectrum side of things. There's this one faction that's the Medusa sector, which is this hacker faction that's basically trying to do. It's very inspired by the manga Blame. If you've read that, if you're familiar with that, the world is a post-apocalyptic world in space. So civilization has crumbled like decades ago. So their role is sort of to try to unearth the secrets of the internet system that was destroyed when the world ended. They're trying to bring back civilization, connect humanity through the internet. And they're opposed to the Synth Arch, which are this android faction made entirely of machines and transhumanists, like human beings that are trying to become completely cybernetic and so on. And they have more of a, almost like a religious side to technology, and they're also very diametrically opposed. And then there's the Corsair Syndicate faction, which is like the bounty hunter outlaw faction that sort of gets in between and fights against everyone because they're very much about themselves and just getting rich, fulfilling contracts, and fighting everyone in that side. But there's like several encounters and story moments where each faction fights against each of the other factions in several different ways.
Tell me about the modularity of this game, because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, cool. For one, I'm going to 100% play through it on my own. I'm probably going to play through it with my wife and a few other people. But I'm also very interested in taking the world that you're building, the assets that you have, and using them and dropping them into other things. Like, for example, I am running a actual play called The Eye of the Tyrant. I would love to take like that setting and just be like, cool, I'm gonna plop this down in on it, add these factions, really increase the stakes and the fun.
Yeah, that's totally something that I want to make part of the game early on, is that because the game makes use of a lot of generator systems, there's location generators, there's planet generators, satellite generators, like spaceship generators. It's definitely something that you can take in and just plop into your mothership game, into your traveler game. Yeah, there's a lot of tools in the game like that, and they're very deep in that sense. If you want to create new planets, if you want to create any sort of conflict, if you want to create a spaceship fight, even if you want to just maybe even just take this spaceship system from Astro Prisma and just put it into other sci-fi games that don't really take care of the spaceship side of things, that you can just create fights, use all of the stat lists for the different spaceships, and just include that in your own world that way. Yeah, it's very modular in that sense. There's also a section at the back of the book with a bunch of D20 tables, D100 tables that you can use for any other game. So yeah.
I recently
So smart.
like rediscovered the joys of generators and random tables. I remember like when I first started running stuff with like 5th edition D&D, and even before that when I was running stuff in like 3.5 and Pathfinder, I remember like using online generators and I would just be like, ugh, like this is not what I want it to be. Like I would try them out and it just wouldn't ever fit. And I think that's like maybe had to do with genre, maybe had to do with the tables at the time that I was using, but it never seemed to fit. But the more that I've shifted as a player in the space and running games and being a game master for other people, I've started to lean more and more on random elements. But like in Battle School, the game that I put out for Zine Quest in February, I created just like I ended up making a deck of cards for it for generating encounters and stuff. And really it came down to that, like wanting that video gaming kind of experience of like being thrown into a compelling new situation that you didn't really plan for, rather than like the GM just having to have like all these cool encounters. And it was a tool, right, for somebody getting into my game to be able to generate things that thematically make sense and kind of help them in playing this game in the kind of genre space that I want them to be able to. The generators and curating these lists became so much fun for me in kind of world building and tone setting, as well as thinking about mechanics that I, maybe missed, right? Like trying to create a comprehensive table of all these different spaces within the world that would make sense for a location. Okay, now let's think about hazards. What kind of hazards can we put into these locations? Okay, now I need to think about any and all kinds of damage that could be dealt or conditions. Like I hadn't thought through a lot of things in the design space until I was working on these kind of holistic lists of generators for encounter design that, you know, it really pushed me into another space of design just because I had to think about the generators. Now, and so my question for you is, when you were working through this project, from what I understand, you've been working on this for like a year and a half, probably at this point.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
closer to 2 years, because I started doing some of the art, some of the early prototypes a little bit earlier, but yeah, it's about 2 years.
What are the big like leaps that you feel like you had throughout the process to where you made a small choice, like I was saying for me, where I was like, all right, I'm going to introduce some generators, that then pushed you to go, oh my gosh, I have to design a lot of stuff to account for this little decision, and that ended up making the game better?
Hmm. So there's one that jumps to mind immediately, which is that the moment that I went from the early prototype of the game, which it originally was a much smaller sort of game. It was gonna be like a Zine or Steam
Yeah.
for Simon, which is the moment where I made the first version of the planet generator. That's the first point where I saw this system works really, really great. It's like the best thing I've designed so far, and it is clearly a system that you can expand modularly, if that's a word. I started doing the planet generator, and I expanded. I added more planets, and then I did the satellite generator. I did the encounter generator, and that just kept building and building and giving the game more and more depth. And every test of the game that I would play, it kept feeling more and more unique every time I would play with a different character. And then I would say that's the main point that made me go from like, okay, this is like a 20-page scene to I'm going to actually make a 120-page book. And then the other big jump, I would say, is the moment that I introduced the starship system, because it wasn't going to be so deep. Like, you can make your own starship. It's a modular system. You, again, like very similar to FTL, like ships are made of different modules, the engines, the cockpit, the weapons, the systems, and you can build your own ship. You can also pick the ships from the back of the book and just buy an entire pre-made model. But you can literally make your own ship from scratch and make your own decisions as you go and upgrade your ship. That point where I decided I want this to be in the game, that was 200 hours later, it's actually in the game.
Yeah. It's like, man, I love this idea. What have I done?
Here's
That's
the thing,
awesome.
though, right? Like, that is something that people are hungry for.
Yeah.
People want that level of detail in the TTRPGs they're playing, especially a space TTRPG system.
So it's funny, right? So like we found your post on Reddit, and I think that was like a while before you actually launched your campaign. Like all I
Yeah.
could do was click on the like get notified at that point.
Yeah. I started posting in January and I launched in March.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to like get into like the sign month thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to like, yeah.
Which is, yeah, and it's funny because we found it then. We're like, oh, maybe this is going to be a part of Zine Quest. And then it didn't pop up. And then we kept waiting. And then everything came out for it. And then I was like, oh, wow, they're funded. Oh, wow, they're funded.
They're funded.
Oh, my goodness. So for our listeners at home that aren't familiar with the project, you made a lot of money. About 385,000 euro, which for us is about $416,000. You got real close to $500,000. That's a life-changing amount of money. And that's incredible. It shows so much enthusiasm in the space, as DJ was mentioning, for a game like this. When it comes to a project that, you know, you're fresh out of university, right? Like you've been out for like 7 months, maybe.
Yeah, 7 months.
Yeah. And so it's like you've launched this project. Before launching it, right? You've been working on this for 2 years. Before launching it, what was the bar of success? So like, all right, I've put it out. I did my project. And then now that that bar, I'm assuming, is much higher, what does that mean for you going forward? You know, like, what has this project done for you in terms of creative fulfillment and career trajectory and whatnot?
Yeah. So I totally didn't expect to first have as many people participate in the project and obviously not raise as much money. Like one thing that I keep on like remembering often is that my Excel spreadsheet for the costs and the printing and everything for the book before I launched, it finished at like 1,200 backers because I didn't even think I would get more than that. And I ended up getting 7,000 backers. So
Yeah.
that's like, yeah, a very simple example. But this whole process, what has allowed me to do is because I want to get into other areas of the industry, like especially board games. That is an industry that's so much harder to get in than RPGs, because RPGs you can write a book and you
Yeah.
can print it and it's relatively easy. But making a board game, it needs a lot of first like initial like capital to start, because if you don't sell 2,000 copies, you're losing money of that
Yeah.
board game. You need to print meeples, like wooden meeples. That's a lot more expensive than making a book. It requires a lot more factory work and proof and that sort of thing. So just being able to have this amount of funding just allows me to be much more secure and be able to create board games without having to worry about it. I need to find a publisher. They're going to give
Yeah.
you a bad deal. I'm not going to be able to make, enough money to keep doing this full time. This just allows me to like get creative freedom to make the best game that I can for my next project.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's amazing. So I had a moderate amount of anxiety when I did my own Kickstarter. Andrew had a bit of anxiety. We didn't do a cost spreadsheet until we were halfway through the month. After we had already put all our rewards and stuff up.
In terms of the
Right.
scope that we had set. We're like, oh, it's going to be small. Let's get a little bit. And then
gonna
we're
be
like, oh, we should think this through.
Like even now, I look at like our 116 backers each that we got, and I'm just like, oh boy, this is it's scary. When I saw first, I watched your I watched your career with great interest.
We were sending each other updates as we saw your
Yes,
Kickstarter
yes, we
blowing
were.
up, like every couple days.
I was like, okay, cool. So I was also keeping track, because we had done our finally cost analysis, and I was like, okay, cool. When is she going to hit the point of this is scary, right? And then how long until she gets to the point to where it is no longer scary, but is like, cool, I'm over that spot. Because I have we have friends who have kickstarted large products, not nearly as large as Astro Prisma got. And for them, they're still putting their stuff out, but like it's delayed because like they got to about 80% of what they actually needed. Did you have a moment where you were looking at this and you're just like, oh no, the scope is out of control?
Yeah, I had a lot of moments like that throughout the campaign. The main one is when I crossed over, I want to say 2,500 to 3,000 backers, which is half of what I ended up getting, which was the point where like, okay, I can know none of the things that I've planned so far for production work, because now I have to print this with a whole different printing process, which is the, I forgot how you call it, but it's like the one that uses like the different colors instead of digital printing. So I had to completely change manufacturer, account for that in the shipping, fulfillment. And I just had to do that in like the 2 weeks in the middle of the Kickstarter out of nowhere. That was the point where like, okay, this is starting to get really scary. I'm going to have to like reimagine everything, all of the logistics behind it. But yeah, once you've done that, from there it's just positive until the end. But especially because the success it had, it has allowed me to do things that I otherwise would not been able to do. Like the virtual tabletop integration that we're gonna do is amazing. Like the
That's
prototypes
with
I
Alchemy,
have,
right?
yeah, like
That's
That's awesome.
amazing.
that looks
Yeah.
amazing. Some of the things I'm working behind the scenes that I haven't revealed yet, but I'm working with like the soundtrack, maybe being able to release it physically in like a vinyl or something like that.
Ooh.
That
Oh,
is amazing, and
wow.
I would not been able to do that before. So yeah,
That is okay. Well, if you do release it on vinyl, make sure you send me an email, because it will go right in my collection. Um, that's so cool. Yeah, and it really is like there's that spot where like it's scary, but like once you figure out the logistics, once you've changed up your printing process and all of that, then I guess yeah, it makes sense that you've got it figured out, and it's like, well, it doesn't matter. The more people that back at this point, it's already figured out. Now let's fund our future
Yeah.
projects. Speaking of future projects,
What's next?
what's next?
what's next? Well, there's a couple things next. First, I wanna make sure that I keep supporting Astro Prisma. I wanna give a lot of support. I'm gonna make the game jam for like third party content when the game releases. That's gonna be really exciting. That's gonna also take a lot of work because I want to set up the website and like include all of the third party content people make there. And then from there, I want to start working on the next game, which is going to be. I wanted to. It's sort of a weird concept. It's gonna be a solo game, but it's also gonna be much more focused on traditional like co-op play with like 4+ players. And I want to do something where it's half RPG, half board game, where like it takes elements from both. And yeah, I've got a really interesting idea, and I can't wait to work more on that. I really can't wait to get into the board game space, and I feel like this is gonna be like the first project, and like it's like an in between step between the two things, and I think it's something that it hasn't really been done before in this way that I want to do it.
You like delivering on this Kickstarter that you've just absolutely blew out of the water, like is going to inspire so much confidence in everyone who backed you, that you can deliver. And I think that when you do launch that big, TTRPG board game project, uh, having that track record, people are 100% going to flock to it.
I think what's really cool about Kickstarter, right, is so much of the growth, and I'm sure, you did plenty of marketing elsewhere too,
Yeah,
but so much of the growth comes through people just finding it on Kickstarter and being like, oh, this is
totally.
cool. And it's like, I think that for me, in a small way for Battle School, it was like being validated in the space, knowing that I have an interesting idea that people actually want to play, right? And, jumping into that and growing a community was extremely exciting. I love, the format of game jams. I've done a couple in the video game development side of stuff. And that's always been such a blast. When I saw that you listed that, I was just like, I don't know, it felt like a moment where I'm like, okay, like she gets this in terms of like, I think how this needs to grow. And like for this to be a game that has legs for a long time, as opposed to like, yeah, I played that solo game once. It's like, no, there's a lot of room in this space. And you're kind of growing, the game in a way that it is inclusive. It's inclusive for your community to contribute to and actually be a part of why the game, probably has continued success. In that, the kind of the growing outside of just yourself, what support did you have during like the process of creating this campaign, managing everything from art to game design to business management to marketing, right? Was it 100% you? Nobody helped you ever whatsoever? Or did you have like some backup or people that had experience in any one of those spaces, like providing advice or support to you at all?
For the 2 years that I developed it, it was just me on my own with like occasional like help from my boyfriend to like test things.
Yeah.
But I want to say recently, from the point that I announced the game until I released the Kickstarter, I've gotten so many messages from other creators in the community, uh, being very welcoming. I'm also really active in like different Discords, where there's a lot of like RPG creators in there, and they're really open to like discussing, helping each other and that sort of thing. And that has helped me a lot. And there's a lot of things that because this is my first project, there's a lot of things that I probably would have made mistakes in just running things behind the scenes if I didn't have the know-how of other people helping me, especially with things like marketing. I wasn't really familiar with how to market these sort of things. I never had done marketing campaigns before. And yeah, like the help of other creators, like telling me like, you should market this, you should like show this to people so you can get more traction, that sort of thing. I feel like that has helped me make the right decisions in a lot of ways.
Even when it comes to like being a creative, right? And then getting into marketing again, that's been my background. It's a dissonant, separate side of your brain, and it's a dissonant, like in the spirit of like creativity sometimes. Like it just feels so like clinical and kind of dehumanizing, And so it's like marketing is really difficult to blend with my creative projects, because I'm like, I just wanted to make it pure, like I want it to be the art and let it speak for itself, but also just having support to be like, hey, this is where your stuff needs to be so you can get eyes on it. This is where, you have blind spots. Even like DJ said, like for both of us on our campaigns in Zine Quest, halfway through, we were talking to a friend of ours, Will, who's been on the show a couple times. He's like, hey, you got a COGS sheet, right? Like cost of goods and services. And we're like, kinda. He's like, and so we're on Discord for like, the three of us were on Discord for like 4 hours straight, building out spreadsheets and getting everything to cover our butt. Cause like we kind of knew we had done the math on stuff, but we didn't have things fully aggregated in one place that was going to make us confident, throughout the process that we were doing things the right way. And so like having support and honestly, to your point, like in the community, I've said this before on the podcast, the TTRPG space has been the easiest and most welcoming space for me to get involved into community. It was just one of those moments of reaching out for like the podcast, being like, hey, creator, we'd love to learn about your game. They're like, cool, yeah, let's talk for an hour. Like, thank you for being here today. Like, this is part of why the space is good and wholesome and amazing, because people are ready and willing to have those conversations, to educate other people on different sides of the hobby that we all love and is making us all better at. I love doing this podcast because we get to talk to other creators that are doing things in the design space, in the GMing side of things, that can explain their methodology, their ideas, the way they like to tell stories. And we get to adopt those things and make better games and better experiences for ourselves and other people. So thank you for being here. So when it comes to playtesting, you had a unique benefit that I did not have, which is you get to playtest yours without anybody else. I needed people, and it was a lot of work. But I can also imagine that being so difficult, because the benefit that I experienced of putting a game in front of other people was they saw my blind spots, right? I'm like, oh yeah, well this mechanic makes sense, but I never explained it on paper, right? And it never was explicitly stated for an external person to be able to ingest my content and fully understand it. So for you, can you talk a little bit to the playtesting experience you've had so far, and like once you finally broke the seal of like handing the game to somebody else, being like, run this and get back to me, and how the experience is?
Totally. So like you said, like playtesting a solo game is a lot easier, I can imagine, than a regular RPG because you're able to do it yourself, a lot of the heavy lifting. But yeah, it's also very important to show other people. And in particular, one thing you said that I really resonate with is someone that doesn't know the mechanics, doesn't know the rules. Can they read through a page in your book and get it the first time they read it, what a mechanic is? And for that, one thing I like to do a lot is show the game to friends of mine that don't know anything about. They've never even played Dungeons and Dragons. They don't even know what initiative is or stats or anything. I really like to show them like, okay, can you read these 3 pages and can you figure out how to make a character and put it on the spreadsheet on your character sheet without any help? And that is such a huge help for like synthesizing things, making things easier, helping with like wording of certain sentences, even like the graphic design to help you guide you through everything. That's a huge help, and it really helps making the game more also easier to read and easier to get the first time you read it. I don't like to have people like halfway through their session, oh wait, I gotta go back to page 68 to read this mechanic again. How did that work? I want people to read the game one time and immediately get how to play.
I'm in layout right now for my book. And one, I hate InDesign. I've worked as a graphic designer for a long, long time, but I don't like InDesign. And so like I've taken lots of spreads examples that I've, made and mocked up for the campaign and stuff early on that I did in Illustrator and Photoshop and whatever. And I'm in InDesign and I'm actually laying it out right now. And so much of that it's the user experience as well as like the not interface. So it's not UI, right? But that it's also, it should function like it. It should make sense. And I'm kind of in a similar design space as you because mine's all sci-fi. What I'm finding is when I'm going through this process of taking a text document and putting into context, like real context, I'm going, oh, wow, I don't need, that paragraph because the layout made sense. Or conversely, I go, oh, crap, none of this makes sense without, another paragraph that explains what this is about when I lay it out. So when it comes to your process, at what point in that 2-year span did you go from text document over to actual layout? And like, how did that inform some of your design and even art generation?
The very first idea of the game, I did over the first, I want to say 3 months. I remember it was summer break. So in those 3 months, I just came up with most of the mechanics of the game. And then from there, starting almost like 50-50 developing the mechanics and the layout art at the same time, doing both of the things at the same time and playtesting and doing everything sort of all at once.
It's seriously so impressive how much you've incorporated your illustrative stuff with your design layout. And it's truly a gorgeous book. I cannot wait to just flip through for a very long time.
And listeners, the link down below, we have a link to the backer kit. So if you want to see what it is we're talking about, go ahead, check that out. So you can, it's in pre-order right now, correct? Yeah, so you can pre-order your copy.
Yeah, I plan on leaving that open pretty much until I start printing. So whenever you see this, you probably are still going to be able to get the book.
Just a couple other touchstones before we fully sign off. You've got 5 different trifold adventures, which is fascinating and so cool. I find it really exciting to know that backers are not just getting a book. They're getting so many other, you've got a journal, you've got the trifold, you've got a lot going on. I'm excited to experience the game from a physical media perspective. But I'm also stoked about the VTT side of things. So again, listeners, if you are more of a digital person, this will be available in PDF and then eventually available in the virtual tabletop over at Alchemy. I think that is fascinating because I also really want to run this like on stream and show people it. So I'm stoked that there's going to be a whole way to do that easily rather than setting up like an overhead camera or something like that. Again, everybody, please check out the pre-order options. Check out Astro Prisma. It's gorgeous. If you're just listening, please go look it up. Take a look. This is a gorgeous looking game, compelling mechanics, interesting toys to play with for your own games. I appreciate it so much for you being here, Camilla. This has been a blast to learn more about Astro Prisma and you and what's coming next for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we really do appreciate you having been here. And audience, if you like what we're doing here, please check out oneshotstavern.com. There you can follow us on all of our socials and check out our Patreon as well. You can get more in-depth interviews and gameplays and all of that just by following along.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.